Okay, seems like we are live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Non-Fungible Rebels. Hey, I mean, it's not very often when I'm having the same guest over for the second time or third time, so it's usually not very. Yeah, I mean, I'm not doing it much these days. But for those who have been listening to, and watching the podcast, most probably you remember Corrales Cachola here back in the, I don't even remember when was it, like a year and a half ago or something
A
like
year,
that.
yeah. A good year at least, yeah.
Yeah, it's been a while. And I asked him to come back because, on socials and during our discussions after the podcast, it felt like, we're really on the same page about many things. And usually the things that we're on the same page are not popular opinions, and I love talking about stuff that is not popular these days. So Corrales is the founder of Brand New Voices, and he'll describe what it is exactly at one point. But yeah, let's just roll. Welcome back, Corrales. How are you doing?
Thank you. Thank you, Ani. Yeah, it's great to be back. And it's always, I think we always have pretty spicy takes on the space, and that's always fun, I think. And hopefully it's entertaining for people to to watch as well. And I like your shirt, by the way. Unfollow people in real life. That's cool.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean,
That's
I
a
had
great.
another I had
I like
another one which said no time for fake people on the previous episode,
it.
and the guest made it like a highlight of the episode.
Yeah,
So I'm like, oh, I just recalled that I have a collection of those with different messages. So I was like, okay,
yeah,
let's just make it a thing from now on. But yeah, thank you.
yeah,
So yeah, I'm really kind of, I really like fresh perspectives, and kind of, it's sort of meaningless to talk about the same thing over and over again, especially if everyone else is already talking about it
yeah.
from the same angle. So I think approaching it from different angles and also kind of talking about stuff that people are not voicing out is important, because that's how you reveal uncomfortable truths. That's how you get out of the comfort zone, and that's how eventually you grow. Otherwise you keep doing the same thing the same way and getting the same results. So I think, yeah, that's kind of why I'm thinking that guests like you are important for the podcast. So do you want to start by saying what Brand New Voices is about, and then we can roll from there?
Yeah. Well, thank you, and it's great to be back on the show again. And Brand New Voices is really, it's a sort of, like, I like to call it like a way of life more than anything, because it's really about empowerment in the Web3 space through storytelling and marketing and culture. Storytelling has become probably the biggest thing in the last year and so I ran a cohort course called Human Marketing. So this kind of term that I coined about this idea of that you know marketing needs a more human. I mean, a lot of people are talking about this. This is not a new concept, but it's I think my take on it is that Web3 especially has very unique properties in it that are not fully explored yet, that can attach to this idea of human marketing, meaning like it's a combination of a lot of things like storytelling, culture, heritage,
Mm-hmm.
and these are based on things. I didn't just like pull these out of my hat. Like, these are based on a lot of like consultancy and things that I've been doing in the space with founders and teams, communities over the last year or two, and on LinkedIn, and putting out content about that. The if you look at what's happening, to me, like, the bright spots in Web3 are not necessarily in the US or Europe. They are happening in places where the storytellers live. So emerging markets, Latin America, Africa, India, Asia, all throughout Asia, um, and the Middle East. So there's a reason for that. And I worked with a jewelry designer from Pakistan last year, and we were exploring. using Islamic art to define the brand and the story of Islamic art and culture versus the product, right? So we wanted to lead with the story and art and history. So we did a lot of deep dives into like, into going back to the Ottoman Empire and is early Islamic art and what it meant and how it traveled and what are the significance of things like the star and icons and things like that are found all throughout Islamic art. And we kind of came across this project called Islamic Coin, which you may have heard of it. It's a
I think you mentioned it on the previous podcast. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
So Islamic Coin is a crypto. I don't frankly know all of the details. I'm in their Discord, but what's interesting is like just to get to the meat and potatoes of it is like what you see happening is a converge. They're mapping on their culture and even their religion onto blockchain in a way that's I've never seen before. And like for a big project of, this is a, multi-million-dollar project that is well funded. So you have to think, when I started seeing that, I started looking at other areas, what's going on in like, say, Japan, which is technically a not emerging market. It's one of a, kind of a first world, quote unquote, market. But when I started exploring why does Japan have a Web3 team, dedicated Web3 team, they don't shy away from calling it Web3, by the way, which is very contrary to what you hear in the West, in the US, and especially like on LinkedIn and stuff, and people saying we have to stop saying Web3. They're leaning into the term, and you see it in the Middle East too. They lean into Web3. They don't lean out of it. So why is that happening? And that to me is because they're attaching a deeper why and mission, which is what I love, I've always been exploring in the space of like, what's the mission of crypto? Not just what is it able to do? Yes, that's what everyone talks about, like freedom, and it represents, financial freedom and transactions across borders. And these are all part of that. But I feel like those just very surface level. You have to really get into the cultural heritage, storytelling, because that's where we find, if you go back to economics and old, the beginnings of economics, they were exploring, what does money mean in the first place? What is the value of money itself? Why does it exist? And I think that's what we're not doing in crypto. Instead, people are just surface level talking all about all of the opportunities, and that's great. But if we don't know
of getting rich,
basically that's what I think. And look,
that's the narrative. That's the only story. There's one story. Here is like, you're gonna generational wealth in the near future if you get involved with whatever I'm doing.
And this is I hate that term, generational wealth. I'll tell you why, because I've heard it so often in crypto and in Web 2, in fiat, and it's like they just carried it over to crypto, which happens a lot. They just carry over things and don't even think about what the impact is. So now crypto people are talking about generational wealth and da 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 da. But my point is, like, what good is all this stuff if we're not talking about not just generational wealth, but what does generational wealth means? It means that you give back to community. You give back you don't just take from the system, the pool of money, your universe somehow. And that's what.
So you mean you're not buying Lambo with that generational wealth?
Yeah.
That's
and
what you're
look,
saying.
It's fine if you want to buy Lambos. I guess what I'm saying is like that there's a really big problem with taking and saying, well, this is for my family and my little community, and not extending that out to the world. There's something wrong with that, because that's what got us into all of the big problems in Web 2 and, pre-internet even, we're talking hundreds and thousands of years here. So
Yeah.
why are we so anxious to, and I feel like that's this whole push with all these like mass adoption maximalists, I call them. Like they can't wait to get adoption. They can't wait to build the next Google, to do all this stuff that they're using Web 2 thinking, but they shouldn't be. And that's I think it's a very dangerous thing to be doing that, especially with AI now. So
Yeah. Yeah, I think, I saw your comment on the post that I made on LinkedIn about mass adoption, and
yeah,
I want to briefly sort of mention LinkedIn, because that's where I discovered you, so to speak. Yeah, I came across your content, and I think everything that you're saying about culture and storytelling and about this space in general. Your content was what basically kind of made you stand out in my feed, specifically on LinkedIn, because unlike many other sort of expert opinions, which were kind of very packed with terms and sounded super smart and sort of positioning people as
yeah,
experts in the field, your content was very human, as you said. Like, your content was about stories, it was about culture, it was linking back to the technology, it was linking back to the space, but it was kind of telling human stories around that and kind of humanizing that tech. And I think we don't have enough of that, because it's kind of we either have that narrative and the stories which are very centered around the tech, because people who share those are very passionate about the tech and they're techie people, so that's the language that they usually speak, or it's centered around the money and sort of speculation and that side of the story that Dajans are super excited about, right? And
yeah,
I do agree with you that there are so many things in between the two that aren't covered enough. People don't really speak enough about that, and unfortunately, maybe because there isn't enough interest around those, they are not also funded enough, so you don't see many projects around that, right?
yeah, for sure.
uh, which
Yeah,
is why it's kind of, you don't have that diversity. You have, like, even with the, in terms of investments, most of them go to stuff that is sort of capturing the most attention and the most interest. So yeah, I
yeah,
mean, I think human stories and the culture and that whole why thing, right? I've been spending a lot of time these days thinking about, like, why the hell am I still in this space, right? Like, it's been 6 years. It's not like things have been kind of things are moving, but they're moving slower. I'm interested in that gap in between the two, but it not too much is happening in there specifically. So, like, why the hell am I still even here? Like, why are people attracted to this space? Because from the outsider's view, when you look into this space, it's scary, it's toxic, it's very overwhelming. It's not an easy space to come to. It's not like naturally attracting people to it. Like, at least good
yeah.
people are
Yeah,
not
that
naturally attracted to it, right?
yeah. That's one of the big, I think, the biggest myths and misunderstandings of, it was never about that. And I don't know why. This is why people you have to reframe narratives all the time, because I think there's a status quo gets built up around in the space around, well, this is what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to go for mass adoption. No, that was never there was never anyone who said that. No one. The Bitcoin white paper didn't say, guys, mass adoption is the way we're going to do this. It had nothing to do with mass adoption. So I don't know what gives people what my belief is that these are people that simply don't understand the cultural underpinnings of the movement from the get-go. They don't understand it, so that they latch on to whatever narrative is status quo and then push this narrative, and it's false. It's frankly just it's not only it's false, but it's the wrong way to build. It's the wrong
Yeah.
way to build something that, like, why are you wanting to recreate everything from Web 2? So you can have the next Google, for instance,
By
so you can
by
have the
complicating it, by
that
putting this
doesn't
technology
this
underneath
makes
it, right? It's
zero sense. No one got
yeah.
into Web 3 to build Web 2. It's a complete contradiction. And so people have to stop thinking that we have to reframe our thinking around what value is and what it means to adopt technology, because technology doesn't get adopted. You have to attach culture and human stories to anything, whether it's money,
To make it
technology,
appealing to
or
people.
or
Yeah.
you can forget about adoption. You might get initial adoption from people, and we see it in Web3 all the time. People technically adopt all kinds of things. They drive up coins up to the billions of dollars, and then guess what happens? As fast as it went up, it drops. Why? Because there's nothing there except price go up, market adoption. Let's see if we can make this thing spread all over the world, blah, blah, blah. No, it's not going to work like that. I mean, I'm
No,
sorry.
I,
So,
I get it.
you know,
You
it's,
spoke about the wrong narrative. Do you want to walk the listeners through the actual right one? Because you referred back to the Bitcoin white paper and to sort of the culture and the initial vision of when this whole thing was created.
yeah.
I mean, and you mentioned the wrong one. I don't want the wrong one to be the only thing that people will hear about. So
Yeah.
let's walk through the right one now.
I mean, look, there's no right or wrong one
Yeah,
technically. I,
well,
I think
I
it's the
meant,
one.
yeah,
I think it ultimately is what I like to say is like, it's up. What Let's think about what you personally, and then in connection to community and in connection to bigger things out in the world, what do you want that to become? And then I think it's a step by step thing. It starts with you and your like lived experiences. So there's nothing to learn. There's no learning except to understand yourself and know, what have you been through in your life? Whether that's, and everyone obviously is going to have a different, to me, that's decentralization. It starts inside and goes, because I didn't live your story, you didn't live mine. We all have different, versions and stories
true.
and takes on things. So it
Yeah,
has to come from that. We have to respect the lived experience and then attach it to community values of like, is this, and ask ourselves, and I get this to me that this is no different than how Bitcoin started. This is exactly how it started, with an idea that turned into that. And it's important to understand the backdrop. This is what I think people don't get. This is the key, I think, to understanding what adoption is. The backdrop of the Bitcoin, the white paper didn't just appear. It was built on many, many years of other people building on that, first of all. So that it wasn't even that new of an idea. It was coming from decades of other people contributing to this idea. And then suddenly this white paper kind of appears. But it's important to understand when it appeared, which is in the backdrop of the financial crisis of '08. So without that backdrop, you would not have Bitcoin. Period. It would not be what it is today, because it's critical to understand that's like block zero, and that framing means that that's a very cultural and revolutionary idea. That's not just about reinventing money for the sake of it. It's that
yeah,
it was built on so much pain, you know, and I feel like unfortunately, I feel like a lot of the early Bitcoiners lost that narrative because they got greedy, because frankly they started seeing the coin go up, and all of a sudden you've got guys like Michael Saylor and these guys, and I mean they're fine. I mean I've learned from Saylor over the years, but I feel like in general they're just about hoarding. They talk a good game about, community values and blah blah blah, but you hear much more talk about store of value and digital gold and holding on, and there's only 21 million of these things, and which I think is
yeah,
bullshit. But okay, fine, this is scarcity, but what good is all this? Like hoarding it and getting your take on it, getting how much coin you can hold. And I just don't feel like that was ever I don't really believe that was the narrative of Bitcoin to begin with. I think that got attached by the early Bitcoin community who didn't like Ethereum, frankly. They didn't like the they didn't like that Vitalik came along and was like, let's fork, Bitcoin, and because I want to build stuff with Bitcoin. I don't want to just hold on to this stuff. And
Yeah.
so Ethereum became known as kind of the builders, blockchain and then token. So I
Yeah.
think a lot of that, frankly, came from a lot of sort of jealousy and kind of disgust that it was being
It's
like the pool was being messed up or something like that with this new
yeah, it's
altcoin called Ethereum.
I think that's the thing, right? It's sort of, everyone claims that they start with the same sort of vision and the same culture and the same kind of, the whole thing is revolving around the same thing. But the
Yeah.
problem is that when you look at it, as you mentioned, like Bitcoin maxis, Ethereum maxis, they have this argument all the time, and they get super passionate. They get kind of, very very extreme in their expressions, in their, the way they argue. I mean, Twitter is kind of, a whole mess because of that, the red laser eyes and all that stuff, right? Then you have different other arguments among the Ethereum altcoins, right?
Right.
My shitcoin is better than your
Yeah.
shitcoin.
Yeah.
This meme coin is the only meme coin. All the others are just shit. I mean,
Right.
it's just a whole, and then you
Yeah.
end up with all these quote unquote communities trying to protect and promote their coin specifically, and they
Yeah.
are doing it at an expense of trying to put all the other coins down in
Right.
comparison,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And to me it's like, okay, if an outsider comes to this space and they come to the space because they are attracted to the whole ethos, to the story, to the whole sort of culture, to the type of people there are in this space. And then they see these people who can't even agree about stuff among themselves. Like,
Yeah.
what does it actually tells about us? Like,
Yeah.
it's kind of why should I choose and pick just one coin and glorify that?
Yeah.
Just because a certain community convinced me to. Like, why do I mean, I think like part of the whole ethos is about freedom of choice. And
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
can choose to pick whatever I want, and I can pick more than one thing, because
Yeah.
there is, I feel like the problem that we're having with communities, it's been so overused and misused term in the whole space by now, um, that they have lost the actual meaning of it. And in most cases, we don't have communities, we have cults. And cults are
Yeah.
not very good, sort of, yeah, I mean, they have this flavor which is quite problematic. Cults around certain personalities is even worse. So
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe we can elaborate a little bit, because I know that kind of, we both have spoken a lot and written a lot about communities and what it actually means and what it is supposed to be, because it feels like we had tackled this, like we had the best thing that we were doing up to a certain point in this space was actually building genuine communities, and then something went wrong. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about in terms of how we imagine what should community be, and then go and try to understand like what happened along the way.
Yeah, it's it's a really, I mean, it's like probably the biggest question in this space, but it's also so abstract that it's difficult to, like, I don't think there's any one answer for it, but I think there's only things that we can do, that we can observe and look at how does this community, our brand or whatever, um, do it in a way that we feel um, is the correct way. And this doesn't mean it's correct for everyone. It just means in this community that that's the way we do it, and that will, but it has to be built on. My feeling is you have to again, you have to start from the inside and then look at, I think I think the smart way to do it is to immediately have a sense of values, mission, vision, values that that are owned, that the community can build that together, or it can be a founder-led value
Mhm.
system.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be explicit. I'm not saying like everyone has to go out and like, you know, put out a website statement on their website. That's not really what, to me, mission, vision, values is something that should be documented, but it doesn't necessarily have to be out there talked about all the time. And so
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it's good you mentioned that because I remember like I have been working in a project
mhm,
and we had on a wall we did a brainstorming session and with the team came up with our values, right? Uh Amazing values, great ones, really nice. We
yeah,
put it on a poster, we put it on a wall in a very visible place so we all could see it at all times while working. But eventually with the time, the founders started doing it felt like, they had that poster to look at it and do exactly the opposite,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
so so
That's what
so
happens.
yeah, explicitly creating that and putting it out there and talking about it versus actually walking the talk are two completely
Yeah.
different things. So yeah.
And I think I think you brought up community, and I think this is so important because when the and I'll get into a little bit of like something I'm doing now, which is this I call this framework called the community revolution, and I did a lot of research into not not Web3 stuff, but Web2. I wanted to understand, can this framework, it's a simple framework, it's like, you it's like the Simon Sinek, why thing. It's like three circles.
Yeah.
You have
Yeah.
the revolution at the what I call the 30,000-foot view. Then it's a smaller view of like a 15,000-foot view of what I call movements inside of that revolution.
Hmm.
So like climate, climate change, climate could be the revolution, the big one, the 30,000 foot. Inside of climate, you have sustainability and different,
Hmm.
different things that contribute to addressing the bigger thing. And then where the opportunities for communities are inside this thing I call the 500-foot view, which is I call these activities. And this is where the rubber meets the road. This is where things are actually being built to address the movement, and the movement and the revolution. So these are things like, and they will almost always take the form of monetizable um, activities. And
Hmm.
so it's interesting because to me, it's a much better way to look at monetization, because it's like any revolution has to be monetized. Period. You have to bring money in, whether whether you're talking about a company, a movement, whatever. You have to bring money into it, and so we see these things happening. An example is like on TikTok, for instance, where you'll see these, or a Reddit community, you'll see these communities just pop up over something really niche, some super
Hmm.
passionate niche topic, like, you know, it could be like, uh, corporate people who are all into um, sustainability, and it's just like it's literally just for these corporate types at maybe this one company, even like that's what their entire community is about. But
Hmm.
this starts to boil over at some point, and at some point the people need to, what I call, they need to build on top of a platform to monetize this revolution now, that they're starting to
Hmm.
form this thing, and because they want to attach it to something bigger and bigger. And so you see it like on TikTok, where creators are like, for instance, there's something called the circular economy. I don't know if you're aware, like it's this term, like basically
Hmm.
like selling used clothes, like it's been around forever, like eBay, but kind of Gen Z has taken a different approach to it. And it there's a lot of like selling of clothing, um, used clothing. But it's interesting. There's a story. There's usually a story attached to it. It's not just used clothing. They have a story attached to that like I've had this since I was a baby, and and then they end up selling, making money, and they're motivated to do this because they believe in the sustainability movement that's attached to
Yeah.
the revolution. So that's where I call this monetizing. These are the monetization pieces, and they're happening all over. And so when I did this framework, I looked at like big brands like Apple, for instance, and Apple has these things called DNA networks that they've had for like 40 years, 35 years. And that's interesting because they're underneath the brand. And not a lot of people know about these communities. They're huge. They're like they're kind of like Reddit communities that Apple has built, and they run on their own in a lot of ways. So they have like, they're usually based around identity, like black at Apple, women at Apple, indigenous at Apple. It's usually an identity
Yeah.
based thing, but there's all kinds of things. There's like coders at Apple, and kids at Apple, and parents of kids, blah blah blah, goes on and on. So there's all these little sub niches, and essentially these are, I think, what people misunderstand about brand is that these are the communities that are actually building the values, the mission, and they're enforcing it through communities. And that's
Yeah.
what I'm getting at, is like, we don't see that, as the consumer doesn't see it. They don't see that stuff. But what's actually happening is their mission, vision, values are constantly being reinforced through these community activities. Then they go back to the brand usually through the product. So like in Apple's case, they're building on using an iPhone, for instance. So they're what indigenous at Apple might be using the iPhone to do certain things for that community mission. So that's their version of a builder's platform. Is actually Apple's own platform. But you can see how, if you do that, you can see how that can sustain that. That's what truly makes mission, vision, values, because it reinforces it again and puts it out into the real world, touching real people, building real things, lots of meaning,
and living it on daily basis.
Yeah, all the
Basically,
time.
right?
It's a
Together.
constant
Yeah.
evolutionary. It never stops. And in all those communities, you see very strong mission, vision, and values statements on all of them. And I think that's very important to understand. Is they say they don't just talk the talk. They've got quotes. They've got programs built inside of these communities that are reinforcing those value systems. And I think Web3 can take a lot of knowledge from that, and just go, okay, we can do that too. We just have to understand that communities have to band together, create ecosystems, and then form. That's where products are going to come from, and adoption.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'll play devil's advocate here in a sense that communities are very strong in the Web3 space, but in most cases, those are communities of speculators.
Right.
And in most cases, the mission is very individual and egocentric. So, we kind of touched this term like, generational wealth, or kind of, and also talked about the cults that form around a certain coin. And I think what happens in this case is, because it's very individual and very sort of, greedy and egocentric mission, which is kind of to pump the coin so we can make more money, right? Each of us can make more money. They do unite around that mission together. They do create memes. They do create, social media content. They do talk on Twitter Spaces for hours and hours in a row. Like, they do some, put time and effort into this thing. I feel like the problem with it is that mission and that value system and what they are after is I mean, I wouldn't say wrong, but like, is not the one that would bring as a result those products and services and businesses and sustainable models and kind of, the community that is not going to be dependent on the coin's price in terms of whether they will still be around or not, right? So they kind of know how to do stuff together,
Yeah. Right.
But the reasoning behind it, and the mission and the values are kind of different.
Yeah. And the reason that I've sort of, again, like going through doing this framework has been like really enlightening, and because I've seen the real problem with that is that none of those activities empower the individual in that. Like, so if I'm in this community and I'm sitting here and I'm pumping up coins, I'm going into Twitter spaces, I'm convincing people to buy this token or whatever my job is, that's not, to me, that's just not what community is about. Community is about empowering individuals where they're at, and and allowing them to transform on a daily. And that means that, so when we talk about like what's the utility, you should be getting utility every single day you're in the community. So it has nothing to do with what the problem with Web3, I think, communities is they think that the value and the worth is based on how well did that community pump up this coin, or did they get the product at Walmart? Was that a success? Yes or no? These are not, that's not community. I'm sorry, that what that is a cheerleading squad for brand. That's if that's what your objective is, fine. That I'm not against it. But
yeah, it's like ambassadors for the brand. It's the ambassadors for the brand. But the problem is, like, if, again, going back to the mission and values and vision, like, you can cheer for a brand, absolutely. But in most cases in Web3, we don't even know what the brand is about apart from the coin's price. That's the issue. Like, very often you don't even know what to cheer for.
And
what is the brand's story? There is no story behind it.
Like, I would argue against, there should be no cheering for any brand, because I think actually the really good brands understand that's not what they're about anyway. They don't want to be cheered on for the brand. They would,
because they're not the heroes of the story.
They're not
right?
the heroes. They would like they would like the communities that they empower. I'm not talking about, not all brands think this way, but I think the good ones do.
To cheer each other.
They want to empower, say, use their brand values to go help out. Let's say it's a nonprofit and in a community that's doing something. They'll partner with them. The whole point of that is to pass on their brand values and to see how can we help them through our value systems and empower them right there and then. It really has nothing to do with the product. It doesn't have anything to do with the brand, not the product. It's that it has to do with the brand only in the sense that these are their value systems. That's what you should be passing on in the community, not your product, and not for an objective of, let's see if we can get something to go do something, to go create, like, can we make, and I've heard a lot of Web3 on Twitter. I've heard some pretty influential like Web3 community guys that are talking about this model that I think is completely wrong, which is that they really believe that the secret to Web3 communities and NFTs especially is to use the IP in a way that pumps up that thing so that you can go get your product in this store, or you can go win something. And then the theory, here's the problem. It's a big theory. The theory is based on, if that happens, the holders will benefit either directly or over time as this thing grows. But you've got a big problem now. The problem is that it's all dependent on the product now, because you've put product first. Actually not putting community first. You're putting product first and saying, if that product fails, the community is going to suffer. But for sure, your IP is going to suffer. Your community members are going to suffer. And guess what happens then? Then the community members rise up and go, how come you're selling, you guys are selling shit back to us? We just paid $15,000 for that PFP, and now you've got another project for us that you want us to put money in. What is this thing doing for me? Because you have framed everything in a product first mindset, a marketplace mindset, and it's frankly it's very bad. I think it's like the worst thing you could do to any community, because you've not empowered them individually. You've created a bunch of people who are cheerleaders to go make a product go do something in the world. And you can't make a product go do something. A product has to be adopted by users and people who want to actually use the thing.
That's exactly what I was going to say, that, people should think about how to create communities of future users versus community of speculators. Because when you look at it from that angle, when you're targeting sort of, trying to gather around you a community of future users who not only share your mission and values, etc., but also can help you understand what they actually want and need, you will end up building together whatever they are waiting for. So by the time it's out in the market, you will not be looking around who are you going to find and where to sell the product to. You will already have people eagerly, impatiently waiting for it to come out so they can use it, because they have felt that ownership and belonging, and they were involved in the process. So you ended up building that thing specifically for the community, not just for the mass market in
right. The community has to be able to, any kind of product that is is a result of the community should be used by that community to elevate each member all the time, forever. And that's what I think is missing and usually that has to do with education. So, frankly, putting out content for the community is going to be that helps them achieve a transformation in their life so that they can become a hero and then build their own communities. That's what you should aim for, not the product is just the result of all that stuff. So they're really going about it the wrong way, because they're not, basically what happens in these NFT communities, they don't have product market fit. So because they don't have the fit, they want to force the fit through the community. They go, we want to skip all of the product market fit part. What we want to do is send our 10,000 members strong community to go and push this thing forward. So we don't want all that messy user, UX and understanding the storytelling of the product. No, we don't want that.
Why bother?
We just want our community to go ram this thing through so that it looks like it has value. But in truth, all it has value for is maybe 3,000 of those holders. And the only reason they want that thing to happen is because they want money back. They don't really care. Do you think they care about the product? They don't give a shit about the product.
I don't think by the time that most of the PFP holders were buying their NFT, they actually knew what the product was, to be fair. And only post factum, when, I mean, the way I see this is PFP projects, their business model was to sell NFTs. That was, the NFT was their product. And then the idea was that they would release additional collection on top of it, and then another collection. And that was the whole model of why they existed in general, which was highly dependent on the market. And as soon as the bear market came, people were no longer interested and stopped buying those NFTs. So now when it doesn't work anymore, only now they sat back and started thinking, okay, whatever we thought about, we milked the cow until the end. It doesn't work anymore. What can we do with what we already have at the moment, right? And then artificially starting coming up with things which don't fit because they weren't meant to be there in the first place, right? So even these new products that they're talking about, that product didn't even exist. So the community was not really emotionally invested, or was not even buying that product. So you will never know if they even needed it at the first place, right?
That's the issue. They don't need it. There's no real need for it. What they're framing is that they would like the proceeds from that, the sales of those things, to come back to them. But that's not
Yeah,
what that's not product that's the most perverted version of product I could think of. Is like that you just want to see what's my return on this thing. If I can
yeah.
manage to convince someone to buy this, what is my return? That
It's good
is
you mentioned that,
that's
because
like the worst.
return is the right thing you
Yeah,
mentioned, like the right term, because most of these people consider themselves investors.
yeah,
They are not thinking that they are actually token buyers, like from the business, like from the sort of deal perspective, like from the purchase and sale perspective. Basically the deal was, you pay me crypto, I send the token to your wallet. As
yeah,
soon as the transaction is complete, theoretically, that's it. Like, the deal has been
yeah,
done, it's complete. No one owes anyone anything anymore, from the technical perspective, right? I'm not talking about the morals and ethics and all the promises that they gave and all that stuff, just
yeah.
from that perspective. So all you did was you bought a token, and it was your decision. That's it. You were not an investor. No one promised you any stake in the company or whatever. You were not promised any royalties, any part of the, profit and all that stuff. But that's the whole thing, that even the mindset is not the right one. Like, they think they are
No,
the
but,
investors.
and
They have the same expectations
yeah,
as investors as a
these are
result,
not.
right?
That's not even the definition of investing. That's pure speculation. There's a huge, a lot of
Yeah.
people they don't understand speculation versus investment, and that's not just in Web3s. That's just in general. People don't understand. They use these terms like interchangeably. They don't even know that they don't know that when they're speculating, they call that investment, and vice versa. But these are completely different concepts. Like, there's a famous, I forget the name of the book, but it's about, it's essentially it's a very old kind of idea about what's called like value investing. And
Mhm.
this is true investing, where you research things and companies or founders of teams, or there's a lot of different metrics to use to look at. But essentially it's like, it has nothing to do with the market price. It has nothing to do with where they're sitting in their market cap or anything like that. It's just simply about, are these good people, first of all? But secondly, do they have the ability to make an impact on the world in a way that
Yeah.
is beneficial? Because assets, assets have to be tied to something beneficial, period. So now it's like, well, what is the benefit? Okay, now we're getting into the interesting stuff. The benefits of any asset should be giving back to community and a bigger narrative than just making shareholders rich. That's not. This might be what capitalism has turned into, but this was not the original capitalist. Theory was not about that. In fact, a lot of early capitalism theory was about that money is a social contract, and so therefore we buy goods and services based on, uh, how does that give back to the collective good of, like, say, a country. And
Mhm.
we've forgotten that. Capitalism has gotten very far away from that in general. And so if you even bring that shit up these days, you're called I don't know what they call, maybe you're called branded a socialist or something like that.
Mm.
There's
Yeah.
always these
Yeah, I can
dirty
see that.
words that people like to
Yeah.
go, oh, you're not a real capitalist. Well, the fact is they don't even know what a capitalist is. And so, and there are, it's become, and let's just face it, that stuff got ported into Web 2, or from Web 2, and it got stuffed into Web
From Web
3.
2 to
So
Web
that's
3,
why I
yeah.
think immediately there was a sense of, this is how investing works. Investing is about doing these activities that you speculate, but that's not. And so now, where is the common good for the space? Why
Yeah.
did Bored Apes Bored Apes is a great example of how misguided they think that the space is about, which is, let's create a brand, let's get VC money, a lot of it, and let's create a brand around this.
Which we didn't really need because we already had plenty of
No
it,
one
right?
needed this. And
Which
so,
is
and
very
then
important
they said,
point.
not only that, once they got the VC money, they said, what else can we do with this money? Let's buy up the most storied NFT in the space. Let's buy them. Let's buy those guys out so that we have control. Oh, but we'll make it look like they have, or we're all about community here. No, come on. They bought the punks. They wanted that control over, to say Bored Apes is the NFT that runs the space. That to me is like
I would
the
say
most
damages the space, but
consolidated,
yeah.
total consolidation, right? And so how did that activity benefit the greater Web3 space? How
It
does that
didn't.
exactly?
It absolutely didn't. And I think that's the thing. Like you mentioned, like pouring things from Web 2 to Web 3.
Yeah,
And I was like, in my latest newsletter, I had this whole kind of musings and thoughts and things that were kind of boiling inside me, and I shared about the fact that I'm really sad that I feel like there are less and less projects in this space that have a soul left. It's kind of a lot of soulless stuff happening, and the soul of the space is slowly dying. And the reason for that, the way I see this, is because in the very beginning, as you said, like during the Bitcoin white paper times, in the very beginning, people who were truly passionate about, and who were understanding the vision and the mission and the story, and value wise were really resonating with it, came into the space where there was no money to be made yet, like not at least all of it, a lot of it. They came into the space because they were truly passionate about it, right? And then what happened with the time, and what happens now, is that we ended up with this kind of dream of decentralization, a dream of the whole ethos that it was built upon. But at the end of the day, it got back to the a different version of one centralized Web 2 thing, because we ended up with, again, as you said, the VC money and the VC funds coming and control, because they realized during the ICO time, VCs were really isolated. They couldn't really play the game. They didn't really get it yet because it was very, very fresh. And I remember personally, I had conversations with them. They were very, very angry because they felt like they were losing their importance, right? One cycle went away. On the second cycle, they already got the experience. They already found out like about the space a bit more. They jumped in, right? They jumped in. So they started investing. They started controlling all these brands eventually that started by themselves, like Bored Apes and many others. So you had going back to the centralization from that perspective, from where the funds were coming. And obviously whoever pays, they kind of control the narrative and the rules of the game, right? Then you ended up also kind of with centralized entities around centralized exchanges, which are highly regulated. And again, like, that entity controls sort of, they too can restrict your account. They too can ask for very,
and they have,
see and all that stuff, right? So you ended up with that. Then the NFT artists which were kind of trying to get away from the gatekeepers and middlemen, ended up with institutions like OpenSea. So then slowly, through different verticals, we ended up with a Web3 version of Web 2, and did a full circle and ended up where what we were trying to escape, basically. Which is I don't know. And maybe that's exactly the reason, partially the reason for that, is everything that we spoke about, and that gap between those two things of kind of the initial source of inspiration and how it all started, to this extreme speculative sort of extreme place that we are at, and the vacuum in between, due to the wrong narratives, the wrong stories, the wrong communities, the sort of different type of vision and mission, and essentially lack of soul as a result.
Yep. Yeah. And I think, if we're talking about sustainability and moving forward, I really think like we have to look at things like, go beyond community and look at ecosystems, because this is more in alignment with, where the economy is headed globally. And we see ecosystems forming around, um, you know, joint, like communities that share interests, or communities that have um, certain like goods and services that benefit the other community, and then they start to form ecosystems around this. And that's, this is what I think we see. There's a book called The Ecosystem Economy by some of the top McKinsey analysts, and it's really interesting because that book really helped me really look at Web3 in a whole different way. They address Web3 and DeFi, actually, DeFi specifically, which is interesting, as a what they call a potential ecosystem player in a really, really big way. But it's potential, but we just don't know enough of the impact yet, or it hasn't happened yet. But it's interesting because I think what they lay out a case for is that, for the last couple decades, things have been converting into ecosystems where consumers join, say Apple or Amazon. They're basically, as soon as they come in through a very narrow thing, like on Amazon, you want to buy stuff. You find something cheaper than whatever somewhere else. So you start to get in this habit, right? But what's really happening is ecosystems start to form around those consumer-led activities. And so, now that's why Amazon now is in healthcare. They have a pharmacy now. They have, right? They have servers. They have AWS. That was never in the original plan, but it's through consumer-led desires that they began to acquire. They began to build their own kind of, you could call them communities, product communities around, like AWS formed because they needed to solve really big server problems, because they didn't want to rent servers from Intel or whatever, because they just knew, like, that's just not going to be how we want it done for our consumer base. We know our consumers, and so Bezos, was always, that's why he talks so much about the customer, because it led to all of this ecosystem building. And so this is happening obviously with Apple, the App Store. When they introduced the App Store, the ecosystems formed with third-party developers and Apple to form basically people get locked into the iPhone because they they like some particular third-party app. Not necessarily, they might not love the iPhone, but they love that app from a third-party developer that runs on the iPhone.
Yeah,
So
it's harder to get out of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what we see happening everywhere. Tesla is doing it, with obviously now Twitter, in China and Asia. Super apps. They have these super apps where you've got ride sharing services, food delivery, buying and selling, marketplace stuff. And now, guess what? Web3 is coming into those too. They have wallets. They're building custom, and this is where I think where I started to go, this is real. This is how adoption is going to work. It's going to come through custom built solutions for that particular ecosystem of players in that ecosystem. It's not going to be a universal, like, our country adopts crypto, or the United States now accepts crypto. We're not in that kind of economy. We don't live in that. We live in an economy that collects data on people and their behaviors, and that didn't exist at the dawn of countries creating themselves. It was just here's a country, and we have a money that represents our country. Period. That's our money system. U.S. dollar, okay, but this is not. Now we're borderless. We can. So crypto is perfect for this because it's borderless. But this also means we have to understand it's a vast. It's like a, it's like a forest, a rainforest of different options, different cryptos, different blockchains that are going to be customized for that ecosystem.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I agree with you. I think it's kind of, we end up serving, like, coming up with ideas of either inventing problems or coming up with problems that only like Web3 people have in the Web3 setup. Which is why we sort of keep self-serving and then kind of stealing users from one to another, because that we have that limited pool of users, which shrinks drastically during bear and then grows a little bit,
Yeah.
more during the hype cycle. But I feel like the way I'm seeing this is, you should think about certain communities or ecosystems that you want to serve. You should
Yeah.
identify like the biggest pain point, just as you said Bitcoin, right? It came at a time when the pain was aching so bad that there was, it would just flourish at that certain moment. So you pick the ecosystem and the community, you
Yeah.
pick the most painful pain point that just, you can solve. You figure out how the technology can solve that in a way that would, I don't know, make the experiences better or whatever it is. Like, does the technology actually make sense? Because very often people put that technology artificially where it's not even needed, and then it just complicates stuff, right? Figure out how to solve it with the technology and then go and serve those communities, not and that's
Yeah.
when, and make it so user friendly they don't even know that the tech is underneath. That's the way I see this, right? And if
Yeah.
all these different communities and founders that are passionate about different things go and pick up their own Web2 communities that they want to serve, one by one, group by group, that's how it will spread around. Otherwise, it's
Yeah.
kind of, if people keep opening, I don't know, DeFi exchanges, one after the other, or, working on
Right.
different features
Yeah.
about stuff that is very, very Web3 centric. I just, yeah, I mean, you just target the Web3 people, and
Yeah.
that's it,
And there could well be a lot of exchanges, but they're for very particular, they're small exchanges for that particular ecosystem. It's kind of like a banking kind of setup where a bank in a certain community that serves that community, and they're connected to bigger stuff, like, they're connected to federal banking system, but really they, in an idea, like, I'm not saying this is how it's actually set up, but ideally, and I believe this is how it was supposed to work, is that this community bank caters to the specific needs of that community, and they provide very certain services that other places cannot do, but yet
that's
they're
yeah.
protected by the federal government protects them through, like, in certain big ways, like they don't let them go bankrupt, things like that.
That's how it works, right? I
Right.
think like recently you have this trend where you have sort of, specialized banks specifically for entrepreneurs or,
Yeah.
small businesses, or specifically for certain sort of minority groups and all that stuff. And they try to tailor things to
Right.
their specific
It
needs,
makes sense.
which is good. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah. And
for example, the one that I know is, for small business owners, and what they do
Mhm.
is, if you use their bank account for your business, it generates your tax return,
Right.
and just things that you need to deal with as a business owner. Obviously, like, it's more convenient. Obviously, you would like to use that, because at the end of the day, like, banking is not a service or a product that creates any kind of emotional connection. Like no one is passionate about their bank account, but if it
No,
has a
but it
certain
could.
features that are for
But
you, then
that's I think we have, though that's not always that's what it has become. Because so I my other non-degen job is small bank marketing, and this is what I learned, like, is that it wasn't always this way, and in fact a lot of early banking was about this sense, just like kind of web3 aspired to be this community run thing. That's kind of what the vision was. Now, along the way, obviously, things happen and it becomes a corrupt system, and that leads up to the probably it leads up to the Great Recession of '08, and then now the Bitcoin story starts, which I think is a really kind of a cool way to look at how the
yeah,
transition is happening. There's a big need for it because in a lot of ways, Bitcoin is saying, let's go back to that. Let's go back to the early internet, the days of exploration, and where we were about community solutions, and we'll provide the new money for that system. But we have to kind of
yeah.
go back. We got to get back to it. We're building a new technology stack, but it also serves the old way of the original ethos of the
Yeah.
internet.
So
That's
it
what it
needs to start with a
Yeah.
reset, which we didn't do a complete reset probably. That's why it's kind of
Right.
yeah.
I think it's a great way to look at this Web 2 to Web 3 transition, that this is essentially a dead there's no more of this model where you have these universal solutions, period. You don't have
Yeah.
we don't see them anywhere. So why
Maybe there is no need for that universal solution per se. Like, who said
yeah,
it needs to be like that?
which perplexes me, why so many Bitcoin people think that they literally call it's going to be a universal coin, as if this is the one
And
currency in the
only,
whole world.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I'm like, that just makes
Why?
no sense. Like, it goes against the entire ethos of decentralization. It doesn't make sense. That's centralization. I don't
Okay,
understand that,
so
but
to to wrap this up, I think we covered tons of stuff, and I
covered a
think,
lot. Yeah.
what I loved is that we didn't really speak so much about stuff that others are already talking about,
Yeah.
which was like
Yeah.
the whole purpose of this whole conversation, to provoke some thought and kind of to make people look at things from different angles and kind of maybe get curious to explore a bit more, and move like their gaze a little bit away from pure speculation, and sort of think that yeah, it's not only that, there are other things around this as well that I can explore
Yeah.
potentially. I think that's kind of where we ended up with, and obviously we spoke about loads of stuff that we're not super happy about the space. So I guess it would be kind of logical to wrap it up by maybe having any ideas of how we, like any of the person who is in this space at the moment, how can we make this space better?
I mean, I think you have to building is the solution, but everyone says that, like, the builders are building. I think, though, you have to be intentional, obviously, about the building, and have a mission that's not just about the product. So I think that's where people go wrong, is they think they're building so that they can promote some sort of some blockchain solution, or some sort of, they're itching to present this new thing. But I would say, in product development, like, even the best ideas, they're only I it's once that idea is formed, it can take many it can it's the community now has to take over that idea and turn it into something. So you always have to serve the community first. And so even if you come with a great idea, I would say builders have to be aware that that's just an idea. No matter how much, I don't care if you've worked on it for 5 years or 10 years or 20 years, you cannot come at that and say, this is a solution I'm going to bring to marketplace. That's not the way to bring anything
Yeah.
to market, because all you have is the idea, and that's powerful. And you are the guide to your job is to be the guide to make that thing come out, but the community has to ultimately build it. They
Yeah.
have to build it themselves. This
I
is built
agree
by
with
people.
you. I agree with you because I have met many founders who ended up speaking to community people and to marketing people after they've built the whole
Yeah,
thing, like
that's
2 years later,
wrong way
in
to do
order
it.
to discover that no one actually needs what they've
Yep,
built and they are the only ones who are super passionate about it. And they're
exactly.
like, no, 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 no. You just need to let people know that it's there.
Yeah,
They will
right.
fall in
Yeah,
love
no,
with it immediately. And I'm
sorry.
like, yeah, you did fall in love with it immediately, but it's your
Yeah,
idea, it's your baby, but no one really needs it.
yeah,
So I agree with you totally. It was really nice chat. I
fine.
truly enjoyed it. I was kind of looking at Twitter and LinkedIn and my DMs in between, and those who were watching, they enjoyed it too. I can
Nice. Oh,
attest to that
were
because
we
I have
live
the info.
on a streaming live somewhere, or?
Yeah, we were. We
Oh,
were
okay. I
streaming
didn't
on LinkedIn
know.
and
Awesome.
Twitter. I thought you did. You did know.
I
Okay.
don't know. I just
Well,
come on.
maybe
I just said, "Where's the link for me to come on?" And I wanna talk to Annie and
maybe it's better that way. So you were kind of without filters. So
Awesome.
anyway,
Annie,
so yeah, it was really nice to speak to you, and I really enjoyed the topics, and really nice to
likewise.
reconnect. So I'll
Yeah,
I'll
for sure.
say bye to the audience, and then we can carry on. So
Okay.
thank you everyone for watching and listening to the recording on the audio podcast, and see you all next week.
Cheers.